Shira. So, just to give an introduction, so we know that there are different Gemara, it's called Masechta, tractate. And each tractate talks about a different subject. So there's a tractate called Shabbos that talks about the laws of Shabbos, obviously. A tractate called Rosh Hashanah talks about the laws of Rosh Hashanah. Tractate that's called Kiddushin that talks all about the laws of marriage. A tractate that's called Gittin talks all about the laws of divorce, and so on. But not everything has its own tractate. So when it comes to the subject of Moshiach, even though on one hand it's one of the basic principles of our belief, but there's no tractate, there's no Masechta that's called Moshiach or Geula. So what we know from the Gemara, from the Talmud, is a little bit here, a little bit there. In every tractate, you'll find something that touches on the subject of Mashiach. But there's one tractate that has the subject of Mashiach in a more concentrated way, which means there's a few pages that talk specifically about Mashiach, and that is the tractate of Sanhedrin. Sanhedrin, there is a whole Masechta, a whole tractate, it's called Sanhedrin, which means those people that belong to Sanhedrin, which was the highest court of rabbis in the Jewish people. They were situated in the Beis HaMikdash. There were 71 rabbis. That was like the highest sort of supreme court of justice according to Torah. And they were the central Torah authority for the whole Jewish world in the times of the Beis HaMikdash. And there's a whole tractate that talks all about those laws. In that tractate, there's a few pages that this is probably the most in the entire Shas that talks about Mashiach. So we're not going to learn everything that's there, but we'll learn pieces from there, which will give us a better understanding of the subject of Mashiach. And also, as we emphasize all the time, that it's very important to look into the sources, because that's where a lot of the confusion comes from, that people don't know what it says in the source. Everything is hearsay, and therefore there could be confusion. So we're going to look in the source to understand what it says. However, if you remember the first class that I gave, those of you that were there then, we said there's a big difference between the Rambam and the Gemara. And the difference is that in Gemara, there could be things where it talks about the subject of the Mashiach that are written in a metaphoric way. In the Rambam, which is a book of halacha, whatever it says there is clearly to be taken literally. There's no metaphors in halacha. So as we go through it, I'll try to point out where there are differences of opinion or what is literal, what is a metaphor. But let's start. So this is in first page you have is Tractate Sanhedrin, page 96b. If anyone doesn't know why it says 96b, it's because Gemara, all Gemaras have the same way that it has numbers, page numbers, but the page number is only on one side. So the way to identify, and when you make reference, is you say page 96. If it's on the first side, it's 96a. On the second side, it's 96b. In Hebrew, we would say Amud Aleph, which means the first side, Amud Beis, the second side. Okay. The little number 5 shouldn't confuse you. That's just technical, because this is Hebrew English, so everything is longer. So the same page, 96b, has like 5 pages in the translation. Amalei Reb Nachman Reb Yitzchak. I'm going to read the Hebrew and the English. Reb Nachman asked Reb Yitzchak, Mi Shmielach, have you heard? Emasai Osi Bar Nafla. When will Bar Nafla come? Bar Nafla is Hebrew and Aramaic, but it means someone who fell. Like when will he come? The one that fell. So he says, who are you talking about? Emele Man Bar Nafla. Who is Bar Nafla? Amalei, so he said Moshiach. So he said Moshiach? Bar Nafla Karasla, you call him Bar Nafla? Bar Nafla means one who falls, like Moshiach is a king. He's greater than all kings. He's a tzaddik, greater than all tzaddikim. Why are you using such a term which sounds like a sort of something condescending? He fell. Amalei is based on a pasuk, it's based on a verse. Which verse? It says, Vayemahu, on that day, Akim, I will raise, I will establish. Let's turn the page. 97a, 1. As Sukkah's David and Aphelas, the booth of King David that fell. In fact, on Sukkot, when we do the benching after the meal, there's something which we add in benching. Harachamon, Hu Yakim Lanu, Sukkah's David and Aphelas. The same word, Sukkah. Sukkah means a hut or a booth. And because the Torah refers to King David's kingdom, like something which fell, it has to be put back up again. That's why it uses the term Bar Nafla, something that fell. And one of the ways that's explained by the commentaries, why do we use a term Sukkah? You're talking about royalty, kingdom. Because I want to bring out a point that, God forbid, a person has a house and the house falls apart. You have to rebuild it from start. But if you have a tent or a booth or a sukkah, something like that falls apart, you just pick it back up again. You don't have to recreate it all over again. In other words, King David's kingdom didn't really ever become null and void. It's always there. It just fell. It's like a person who falls down, you just have to stand up. So this kingdom is something which fell, and and Hashem will raise it up once again. The next piece of Gemara, also to give a little introduction, is as follows. That when the Jewish people were in Egypt, Hashem told in advance, Avram Avinu, how long they're going to be there. It says they'll be there for 400 years. When the Jewish people went to exile the first time, Beis Mikdash was destroyed by the Babylonians, and they knew this from the Nevi'im, from the prophets. They were also told how long it's going to be. It's going to be for 70 years. When the second Beis Mikdash was destroyed, which is the beginning of the Galus we're in, it's almost lasted 2,000 years, we never were told how long we're going to be here. They were told that there's going to be a Galus. Beis Mikdash might be destroyed if we don't get our act together. Unfortunately, they didn't listen, but it was never said, and if it does, you'll be in Galus X amount of years. There's no time. So we don't know when it's going to end. What we do know is not when it's going to end, but what is the world going to look like at the time that end is coming. So when the time comes and we look around and we see things in the world that are different and things in the world that are happening that are written here, that gives us encouragement, and that helps us recognize that we are in that time now. So this is what we're going to find in the Gemara. That's number one. I'm giving an introduction to what we're going to see. Number two, a lot of the things you're going to read soon are things that are pretty sad, like not good things. This is going to happen, and that's going to happen here, and this is going to happen there. And you would think, wouldn't it be the opposite? You know, there's an expression in English, I'm beginning to see the light at the end of the tunnel. What does that mean? You're in a tunnel and it's dark. When you're getting closer to the end, does it get darker or does it get lighter? What? Lighter. Of course. So I would expect that as the Golus is coming to an end, we should be seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. We should start saying only light. Things are getting better and better and better and better. Yet here in the Gemara, it's going to describe how a number of things are going to get worse. Much worse. So first of all, it's a message for us that when you see things like that happening, people say, forget it. I can't believe that Moshiach is going to come now. Look what's happening here. Look what's happening there. But if you read the Gemara, and what the Gemara describes, we see the fact that negative things are happening is not a contradiction to the fact that Moshiach is coming. On the contrary, it's one of the signs. But of course, there's also other signs which are amazing, positive things happening. So that's question number 2. How could both things be signs? Either if Mashiach comes, negative things have to happen, or if Mashiach comes, positive things have to happen. How does it make sense that they're positive and they're negative at the same time? Everyone follow the question? Everyone know the answer? No? Okay. So first of all, we have a precedent to this, and that is when the Jews went out of Mitzrayim, out of Egypt, there's a similar thing going on. What is it? On one hand, Moshe Rabbeinu came to the Jewish people and said, Hashem sent me to tell you good news, that the time has come, your slavery is going to be over, you're soon going to be going out of Mitzrayim, we're going to be going to a mountain called Har Sinai, and we're going to receive the Torah. Good news, couldn't be any better news than that. The fact that they heard these words the first time in the 400 years, that they were in God's 210 years, that was exciting. On the other hand, what actually happened, and this is not a story in Gemara, it's not a story in a Medrash, it's a story in the Chumash itself. When it came to Paro and it said, let the Jewish people go, what did Paro do? How did he react? He said, what kind of nonsense is this that people want to leave? You know why they want to leave? They're not working hard enough. So they have time to think about nonsense. I'll make them work harder and they won't have any time to think about this nonsense. And he actually made new decrees that they should have to work even harder than they worked before. In fact, they got so bad that Moshe Rabbeinu was attacked by some Jews. And they attacked him and said, what are you doing to us? You're ruining our reputation. You're making Paro hate us more. Paro is making us work harder. And they basically harassed Moshe Rabbeinu. They attacked him verbally. And Moshe Rabbeinu went back to Hashem and said, Hashem, why did you send me? Things only got worse. So this idea that things got worse before they got better, there's a precedent for that, and that is Mitzrayim. Okay, so all it does is changes the question. From now, let's go back to Mitzrayim. Why did it happen then? Why wasn't it that then also better as it got closer? Why did it get worse? Anyone ever hear an answer to this question? Good. So I have what to teach. So one of the Mefarshim, one of the commentators on the Chumash, and this is also brought down a lot in the Rebbe Sichos, he gives 3 examples of the same idea, same principle. And that is, unfortunately, sometimes a person who's sick or seriously ill, and it's getting closer to the time that it looks like he's going to be losing his life, suddenly he sits up in bed, feels a little bit better, and it looks like, oh, something's changing. It appears that way. And then shortly after that, unfortunately, the end comes. And he explains what's the explanation. So he says, because the nature of the way the world is that when there's some sort of conflict between 2 forces, and one force is about to overcome and defeat the other, then the other force puts up its last, we call it the last fight for survival, the last attempt to overcome, not to be defeated, and the other side fights stronger than it ever did before. So a person who's sick, which means, God forbid, that death is taking over life. So the life in the person is fighting for its last fight for survival. And that's why we suddenly see new strength. But ultimately, whatever has to happen. And the opposite of life takes over and the person's life ended. And he gives another mashal. He says, when is the coldest point of the night? Right before sunrise. In other words, dafka before the sun comes up, that's when it's the coldest point of the night. Why? I would think as it gets closer to the sun coming up, it should get warmer. So he gives the same explanation. That night is being overtaken and being overcome by day. The day is coming to, the warmth is coming to defeat the cold. So the last moments before that happens, cold puts up its fight for survival. especially if we understand that everything in the world has an angel in Shamayim that's responsible for its existence. And therefore, every angel wants to do what it's supposed to be doing. So if this is an angel that his purpose is to bring cold in the world, he doesn't want anybody to stop him. So when the warmth comes up, which is coming from the sun, that angel which is responsible for cold fights even stronger. And that's why right before it gets warmer, that's the coldest part of the night. Then he gives a third example with light and darkness. That the darkest part of the night is right before the break of dawn. By the way, you know the term the break of dawn? It's in every language. In Hebrew also, Oz Yibaka Kashachar Erecha, it breaks through. Because right before it gets light, the darkness is more intense. And therefore it like breaks through the darkness. We call it the crack of dawn. Why is it? Because as light is coming to overcome and defeat the darkness puts up its greatest fight for survival. And therefore, it gets darker right at that point before the light comes, and then the light takes over. So he says the same is with Geula and Golus. Geula and Golus is also a struggle. It's a fight between two forces, between holiness and unholiness, between redemption and slavery and Golus. So right before the Yidden was supposed to go out of Mitzrayim, right before Kedusha was about to overcome Paro and the forces of Klippa, the forces of Klippa put up the biggest fight that they can. And that's why Paro intensified the things that he did. And then eventually, Kedusha took over. And then eventually, not only Paro didn't make them work harder, but it says that the last 6 months before Pesach, before they went out of Egypt, there was no slavery at all. But in the beginning, the slavery got worse. So the same thing here, well, you're going to read in the Gemara that before Moshiach comes, this will go wrong, and that'll go wrong, and this will be bad, and that'll be worse. How does that relate to Moshiach, though? And the answer is, because Moshiach means that there's going to be a new light in the world, and all the things of negativity will be gone, so everything in the negative realm is fighting for its last survival, and that's why we'll see that in some ways it's going to become more intense than it was before. Okay, so let's start. Page 97a. Any questions on what I just said? Understood? Okay. So we asked him, when will he come? Now he's giving the answer. Amalei, Hachi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. This is what Rabbi Yochanan said. I'm reading on page 97a1. Der ben David ba, the generation that Mashiach will come. You notice it doesn't say Mashiach, it says Ben David. Why is Mashiach called Ben David? Because he's a descendant of King David. So we'll have that list with all the terms. I'll show you. We have that word also, Ben David. A lot of people have that name, Ben David. Have you ever heard that name, a last name? Ben David. Ben David, Ken. So the generation that Mashiach will come, Tamidi Chacham Mismatam, the number of Torah scholars will decrease, will get less. Bashar and the rest of the people, Eineim Kolis B'Yogam V'Anocha, their eyes will become worn out from grief and anxiety, and there'll be numerous troubles and harsh decrees that'll be constantly appearing anew. In fact, before the first trouble is over, a second trouble will appear. That's what the world will look like before Mashiach comes. Then he goes on to say, Tanu Rabbanan, our sages taught us. Shvua sheben David ba. Shvua in Hebrew means a week, but sometimes Shvua also means a cycle of 7 years, which means in the Torah, every 7 years is considered a cycle. And in Eretz Yisrael, in the 7th year was called the year of Shvius, a sabbatical year. You weren't allowed to work in the field. So sometimes when you see the word Shavuot, it means 7 days, and sometimes it means 7 years. And here, it means 7 years. This is what the 7 years will look like before Mashiach comes. Shana Rishayna, the first of the 7 years, will see the fulfillment of these words. I will bring rain in one town, and one town there will not be any rain. In other words, In some places there'll be food, and in some places there'll be hunger. Shniya, the second of the second 7 years, chitzai rab mishtalchim. The arrows of famine will be sent forth, which means there'll be limited hunger all over. The third year, rab gadol, there'll be a big hunger. And unfortunately, men, women, and children will pass away. Chasidim v'aisa maisa, also people that are pious people and people that are good, do good deeds, but things will be in a way that Torah mishtakachas me'emdea, that people will forget the Torah that they've studied. That'll be in the third year. In the fourth year, things will get a little bit better. There'll be food, but still not enough. The fifth year, there'll be a lot of good food. People will be able to have enough food to live. Page 9782. People will eat and drink and they'll be happy. The sixth year, there'll be a lot of noise. What does it mean, a lot of noise? There'll be noise about Moshiach's coming. The Shvius, the seventh year, Muhammad's, there'll be wars. And at the end of the seventh year, then that's when David HaMelech's the descendant with Moshiach, that's when he'll arrive.
This is now.
What?
This is now. Yeah.
So there are things, so again, a lot of the things could be that this is now the wars that are going on. But the other years was there famine, was there hunger, some things don't click exactly. So first of all, again, this could also be metaphor and it could be literal. It's one of those things. So it's very hard for us to interpret it. Why are we learning it then? Because still, by learning it, you get a certain idea of what it's about. And some things that it says here, you'll see, fit perfectly to what's going on in the world at this time. And that's encouraging when we learn about it. But I want to answer another question, which I asked before. I didn't give the answer. The other question was, we'll soon learn about positive things that are going to happen. And even now, we talk about positive things, that the hidden secrets of Torah now are revealed. So how do you explain this part? That before Mashiach comes, negative things are happening. We just explained why. And before Mashiach comes, also positive things are happening. It should either be one way or the other way. How's it both? So I'll give another mashal. Maybe that mashal will help us understand this better. In fact, there was a great Hasidic Rebbe that he focused more on the positive part. How come from the times of the Baal Shem Tov we saw people who predicted the future and they openly spoke about what's going on in Shamayim, like almost like prophets. And we haven't seen this for hundreds of years. And how is it that now we're seeing, in fact, according to Torah, the generations only get weaker. So how is it now that we're seeing such amazing things like people who are the level like prophets and they're saying open prophecy, things that only a prophet could know? How is this? And he gives a mashal. The mashal is that a person is riding in a wagon and it's at night. But he has light because every house in town has the light on and the light from the homes are shining into the streets. In addition to that, there are lampposts in the streets and the lampposts give light. So between the two things, there's light as he's traveling. That's as long as he's traveling in the town. Once he leaves the town, goes out on the road, out of the town, it gets darker. So he travels the first, let's say, a few hundred yards, there's still light from the town, right? When he travels a little bit further, it gets darker, but there's still a little bit light from the town. And he travels a little bit further, it gets even darker. Still a little tiny, less light left from the town. The further out he goes, the darker it gets, and the less is the light from the town. And then he keeps traveling, and a very strange thing happens. He travels further and further, and starts getting lighter. How does that make sense? And brighter, the more he travels. So the answer is, he's further away from the town that he came from, But now he's coming closer to the next town. So he's beginning to see the light from this town that he's approaching. Got that? The Moshiach. What's the Nimshal? The Beis HaMikdash was our source of godly light. It brought spiritual light into the world. It brought brachas, physical blessings into the world, because Hashem's light was shining. Once the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, that light is no longer shining. But the first generation after the Beis HaMikdash, there was still some light left. And the second generation, there's a little bit more light left, but less. The third, even less. And the fourth, less. And the fifth, less. Every generation post Beis HaMikdash destruction, the light is less than the generation before. So really what it should be is the further out you go, it gets darker, darker, and darker. So how come all of a sudden we see a light that we never saw before? Very holy people revealing holy secrets of the Torah and revealing things that are going on in Shemayim like a prophet. The answer is because now we're getting closer to the third Beis HaMikdash, and we're beginning to feel the light of the third Beis HaMikdash, and that's shining in the world. And as a result of that, there are positive things happening. What?
People were really
like the stories of the Baal Shem Tov and all these great tzaddikim, where they would tell people there's this decree in heaven, or they tell people, I see the future is that you're going to have this, or you're going to have that, or they told people things that they know where their neshama was here. A previous time, these are all things that ordinary humans can't know this. Only a tzaddik who knows what's going on up there can have the answer to such questions. So how is it that now we see such spiritual things in the world which we never saw before? And the answer is spirituality became concealed with destruction of Beis HaMikdash. And every generation it becomes progressively darker. But as we're getting closer to the third Beis HaMikdash, it becomes progressively brighter. And that's why we see things happening now, which are in a way even more than what we saw in earlier generations. On the other hand, let's use the same mashal and let's ask a question. Okay, there's more light. What about food and water? Is there more water as they get closer, or there's less water and less food? Are the people more exhausted or less exhausted as they travel further? So they're more exhausted. There's less drinks because they drank it. There's less food. In other words, it's an interesting example where you see that some things actually get brighter. Yes, there's more light, but in other areas it gets weaker. There's less food supply. People are more tired, more exhausted because they're traveling so long from the place where they came from. Same thing with us. There are things happening now in generation which are less than ever before because we're further away from the first Beis HaMikdash, from the previous Beis HaMikdash. And there are positive things happening because we're getting closer to the third Beis HaMikdash. So at the end of the day, we'll find prophecies and signs that are very positive, and we'll find prophecies and signs that are in the negative. The only good news is that if it says something positive is going to happen, that's going to happen. When it says something negative is going to happen, it doesn't have to happen. We can change that through tzedakah, through mitzvahs, through tshuva, that the negative things that are predicted don't necessarily happen.
And the positive things, if we don't do good things, yeah.
What?
The positive things, and we don't do good things.
The positive, no, that'll happen. If it's a prophecy for something positive, that has to happen. That can change. Okay, it keeps on going now. Then the next year, things are getting better. People have what to eat, what to drink, and the Torah starts returning to its students. The 6th year, there will be sound. 7th year, there will be wars. And at the end of the 7th year, that's when Moshiach comes. Amar Rabbi Yosef. So Rabbi Yosef said to him, he challenged him and said, but there were so many 7-year cycles and nothing happened. Moshiach didn't come. Let me double check. Okay. Let me turn it off altogether. Okay. So he said to him, there were so many years that we saw a lot of these things happening, and Mashiach didn't come. There were wars, and we didn't see. Abai said B'shishi, Kailas, B'shviz, Muhammad's Meheva. The other things about people learning less and there's hunger, you saw. But did you see that the 6th year there was a lot of noise? Did you see that the 7th year there were wars? In other words, first of all, you have to have all these things happening, and they all have to happen in the same order that it was said. When you see things happening in this order every single year, exactly as written, then you know for sure that's the time of Mashiach. Then the Gemara says this pasuk, Asher chayfu oivecha Hashem, Asher chayfu ikras Mashiachecha. This is a pasuk in Tehillim. It says those that are your enemies, they taunt you, which means they make sort of fun of you. They make fun of the footsteps of Mashiach. In other words, one of the things that people make fun of is naturally the coming of Mashiach. And if you ever had that experience, but a lot of people in Mitzrayim, they will tell you when they meet somebody and they tell them about Mashiach, they get excited. But then there are people that say, yeah, my grandmother spoke about Mashiach, and her mother spoke about Mashiach, and her grandmother spoke about Mashiach. It never happened, it's not going to happen. It's just a good thought. In other words, because so much time went by and it didn't happen, it makes people speak negatively about Mashiach. But again, this was the same in Mitzrayim. When Moshe Rabbeinu came, it says there were many Jews who did not believe that this is really going to happen. And the Torah says why they didn't believe. They were so drained and they were so exhausted from the slavery that it just didn't register in their head that this is going to happen. I once read somewhere that this woman is describing, she was in one of the camps during the Holocaust. And they came to tell them that tomorrow they're going to be transferred to another place. And she said there were 3 different reactions. There was one group of people that got excited. They thought maybe the other place will be better than this place. Another group of people began crying. It's for sure the other places are going to be worse than this place. There was a third group. They weren't crying. They weren't happy. It was just numb, like nothing makes a difference anymore. It was so wiped out. Nothing makes a difference. So basically, being there so long, even though there are so many people who today are known as survivors, which means they were in the camps, they even have numbers on their arms, which means they were meant to, God forbid, be executed. And nevertheless, they came out alive, and there are tens of thousands of people like that. So there were those who just couldn't believe that things are going to get better. And they had the same with Moshiach. Because so many years went by and people believed and it still didn't happen, so therefore there are people who are chayfu igros Mashiachecha, but we have to be strong in our belief. And even though we don't see it, and even though it might not make sense to us logically, so first of all, the Gemara tells us you should know when you see negative things, that's not a sign or a reason to give up. On the contrary, these might be the signs that Mashiach is coming. These might be the signs that the darkness is becoming more intense because it's about right before the light is supposed to shine. Let's do one more piece here on 97A2. So here it says, Rabbi Yehuda said, in the generation when the son of David will come, Beis Havad Yil is Nus, the meeting place where people meet will turn out a place of activities that are not tznius. V'hagodol yicharev, the godol will lay waste. Hagavlon yesham, it's also a place will be desolate, a place in Israel. V'anshe hagvul, the people that live by the borders. I did that. Okay. I guess it should be a little bit nicer, a little bit softer. Chochmas Hasei from Tisra, the wisdom of scholars will decay. People will not respect the wisdom of the Torah scholars. People will not respect those who have fear of sin. the face of the generation be like the face of a dog. So this is a very interesting thing, and this is also one of the things which we could relate to today. People ask the question, what does it mean the face of the generation will be like the face of a dog? And most of them explain it as follows, that with the dog, you see an interesting nature. When a person's walking a dog, who runs ahead, the person or the dog? So who's leading whom, the person or the dog? It looks like the dog is leading you. But then the dog turns around to see which way you want to go, and then it goes in that direction. What does it mean? That in the times of Moshiach, the leaders will be so corrupt that instead of leading people in the right direction, they're going to look, where do you want to go? Oh, that's where you want to go? That's where I'll lead you. Which means instead of leading people in the right direction, they're corrupt. All they want is to be elected. They want to be that people should be popular and people should accept them. So the people want to do something which is corrupt, they'll lead them in the corrupt direction. They want to do something which is not so moral, we'll lead them in the immoral direction, which means not true leadership. And that's what it means, that the face of the generation will be like the face of a dog. The face meaning the leadership, just like within a person. What? That's definitely something which we see now. That it's very hard to find true leadership, which means that unfortunately people have agendas, and that's what takes over more than anything else, especially in the political arena. I mean, I guess politicians were never the purest people on the planet, but they had certain principles which they lived for. And today you see very little of that, and everything is just whatever will get me elected, whatever will get me what?
Hollywood too. I see it with like famous people, they do whatever it is.
Right. In fact, a lot of the things that go on today is not because the philosophers or the educators sat down and said, we have to make something different. Things aren't good. It's the other way around. People want to do all sorts of crazy things. And then the philosophers and the educators and the psychologists would like to be accepted by the movement. So they create a something in psychology that says this thing, which always used to be unacceptable, is actually a beautiful thing. And those who don't want to accept it are actually crazy, and they should be locked up. That's the way it works. It's the other way around. It's not that the leaders are using their values to guide the people, but the people are sort of shaping the way these leaders should be thinking, because they just want to follow. They want people to follow them. That's all. And the truth will be absent. That the people won't do things because of what it's true, but they'll do it because of just to gain popularity and so on. Okay, we'll stop here. You can hold on to these sheets and we'll continue.
בן אדם שהמשפחה שלו בן דוד, אז הוא קשור לשושלת דוד.
לאו דווקא. יכול להיות, אבל לאו דווקא. היום גם אני צריך לעזוב מוקדם.